I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. My name is John, and I've been married to Sarah for 5 years. We had what I thought was a pretty solid marriage until recently. I work for a tech firm, and not too long ago, I secured a major contract with a company in California. It felt like a big win for my career, and I was excited to share the news with Sarah. Maybe it was finally time for us to start the family we had talked about. But something had been bothering me ever since a camping trip we went on with my boss, Mark, about a week ago. When we got back from that trip, Sarah seemed different. She was distant and snappy. At first, I chalked it up to her being tired, but then I noticed something strange. While I was doing laundry, I found a pair of her panties in the hamper, and they didn't look right. There was a suspicious stain on them, and the odor, it didn't take long for me to realize what it was. My heart sank. I had no idea who it belonged to, but I knew something was wrong. My mind raced with all kinds of awful thoughts. After that discovery, I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I had a trip planned to the West Coast for business, so I figured it was time to take action. I contacted a divorce attorney, hoping for guidance. I wasn't sure if Sarah was cheating, but I needed to be prepared. The attorney, Grace, was sympathetic but straightforward. "Do you have any proof that she's cheating?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said, "but I need to know the truth, and if she is, I want out." Grace nodded and told me the next steps. We'd need solid proof like photos or videos for a case of adultery. She offered to hire a private investigator and suggested I start gathering evidence discreetly. It was a gut punch, thinking about it all. This was the woman I had built a life with, and now I was setting up surveillance on her. I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this, but I had no choice. I needed to know what was going on. Before I left for my business trip, I installed a tracking app on Sarah's phone, thanks to the investigator, Ethan, who Grace recommended. He also gave me a voice recorder to hide in her purse. Felt sneaky, underhanded even, but I had to protect myself. I had to know the truth. The day I left, Sarah drove me to the airport. She gave me a kiss goodbye, and I promised to call her later. But something about the whole situation felt off. Sure enough, later that night, when I called her after dinner, she mentioned something that made my stomach turn. "I'm working at a party at Mark's place tonight," she said casually. Apparently, one of the waitresses had bailed, and Mark asked her to fill in. The pay was good, she said, and with school starting up soon, she could use the extra cash. The alarm bells in my head were going off. I knew she needed the money, but why hadn't Mark mentioned this party to me? He was my boss, after all. I kept it together on the phone. "All right," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just be careful and let me know how it goes." She promised she would, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After I hung up, I called Ethan. "She's working a party at Mark's house," I said, the words sticking in my throat. He assured me they'd keep an eye on her and report back with anything they found. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, wondering what was happening at that party. I didn't sleep much, and the next day, I tried calling Sarah again. No answer. My gut told me she had stayed the night at Mark's place, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later that afternoon, Ethan sent me an email. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing what I'd find. Inside were a few attached photos, and my heart sank when I saw them. There was Sarah, my Sarah, at Mark's party, caught in compromising positions with not just Mark but 2 other men I considered friends. My hands shook as I scrolled through the images. Felt like my entire world was crumbling. Couldn't believe it. The woman I had shared everything with was living a double life right under my nose. And now I had proof. The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I knew our marriage was over. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I checked the tracking app. Sarah's phone was still at Mark's house, confirming what I had dreaded. She had spent the night there. Ethan sent me another email, and this one was worse than the last. It contained more photos of Sarah, this time involved with multiple men, including Mark's son, Chris. These weren't just random guys, they were people I worked with, trusted even. I stared at the images, feeling both anger and heartbreak wash over me in waves. These were men I used to share drinks and laughs with. Now I could barely look at their faces in those pictures. There were more men involved, 2 guys I didn't recognize. Apparently, they were friends of Chris. I couldn't even begin to comprehend how far this had gone. The woman I loved was entangled in something I couldn't have ever imagined. After I wrapped up my business on the West Coast, I booked an early flight back home. I was done with this trip, done with pretending like everything was okay. When I got to the house, Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway, and sure enough, her phone was still at Mark's place. I walked inside, exhausted and emotionally drained, and called Grace to let her know I was ready to move forward with the divorce. Later, I finally called Sarah. She picked up, sounding breathless, and immediately, I knew she was lying. "Hey," I said, "where are you?" She hesitated for just a second, then responded, "Oh, I'm at home, just catching up on some things before school starts." The audacity of her to lie so easily, like it was nothing. I felt my blood boil. "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, I'm done with work out here, and I'm heading home." "Oh, that's great," she said, her voice suddenly sweet. "I've missed you so much. Call me when you land, and I'll pick you up from the airport." "No need," I replied coldly. "I'll grab a taxi." I hung up before she could respond. For the first time, it didn't even bother me that I hadn't said, "I love you." Normally, it was something I never missed, but this time it felt like those words meant nothing. I sat in silence for a while, wondering how we had gotten to this point. How had the woman I loved so deeply become someone I barely recognized? The lies, the betrayal, it was all too much. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore, much less share a life with her. When I arrived back home, Sarah still wasn't there. I took a long shower, trying to wash away the disgust I felt, not just at her, but at myself for letting it get this far without confronting her. I was almost numb at this point, just going through the motions. Later that evening, she finally walked in. She looked a little startled to see me, but quickly recovered. "Hey, babe," she said, walking over to kiss me, but I turned my head, letting her kiss my cheek instead. She pulled back, confused. "Is everything okay?" "No, not really," I replied, my tone cold. "I'm not feeling great, probably just jet lag or something. I'll be crashing on the futon tonight." Her eyes widened a little, surprised by my distant behavior. "On the futon? Why? Where are you going?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I've got a dinner meeting," I said flatly. "Dinner meeting," she repeated, a hint of suspicion creeping into her voice. "Are you meeting someone special?" I let out a bitter laugh. "If you're asking if I'm cheating on you, the answer is no. I've never cheated on you and never had plans to. Can you say the same?" Her face paled, and she stammered, What do you mean?" I stared at her, waiting for her to confess, to say something, but all she did was fumble for words. "How was that job at Mark's house?" I asked, probing her. She smiled, trying to play it off casually. "Oh, it went fine, it was pretty fun, actually. A bit of a challenge, but I got through it." I just nodded. "I'm sure it was," I said, the words dripping with sarcasm. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off, glancing at my watch. "I should get going," I said abruptly, standing up and grabbing my keys. Without another word, I left her standing there, confused and panicked. As I drove away, I knew she was probably calling Mark, desperate for answers, wondering if I knew. But she wasn't going to get any from me, not yet, at least. I drove straight to Grace's office. The evidence I had was enough to destroy her life, but I didn't want to act recklessly. Grace reminded me to keep things calm and act normal around her until everything was finalized. But honestly, that felt impossible. How could I look her in the eye knowing what I knew? After leaving Grace's office, I knew there was no turning back. I was done with Sarah and ready to move forward with the divorce. But pretending like everything was normal, that was going to be tough. When I got home that night, Sarah was sitting on the couch, clearly waiting for me. "How was your meeting?" she asked, trying to sound casual. But there was something in her voice, maybe nervousness or fear. I couldn't tell, and honestly, I didn't care. "It went fine," I said curtly, avoiding eye contact. "I'm going to bed." Without waiting for a response, I headed to the guest room where I'd already decided I'd be sleeping from now on. She followed me to the door, her footsteps hesitant. "Are you sleeping in here now?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah," I replied flatly. "I'm still not feeling great, so I'll take the futon." "Is that a problem?" "Oh no, I guess not," she mumbled. "I was just hoping we could, spend some time together. You've been gone for a few days." The thought of being close to her made my skin crawl. I couldn't stand the idea of her touching me after what I'd seen in those photos. "Not tonight," I said, brushing her off. "Maybe tomorrow." She gave me a half-hearted nod and backed away, clearly confused. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She knew something was off, but I wasn't about to lay my cards on the table just yet. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed my resignation letter, and made myself a cup of coffee. Sarah's purse was sitting on the counter, and I saw the opportunity to grab the audio recorder I had hidden inside. I downloaded the recording of the call she'd made the previous night, no doubt to Mark, and headed out the door before she woke up. When I got to the office, I went straight to packing up my things. I couldn't bear to be around these people any longer, especially Mark. I wanted to be out of there before anyone noticed. But, of course, Mark showed up just as I was finishing. "What's going on, John?" he asked, eyeing the boxes in my office. I pulled out 2 envelopes, one with the signed contract for my recent trip, and the other with my resignation letter. "This is the signed contract," I said, "and this is my resignation. Effective immediately." Mark's face shifted from confusion to shock. "Resignation? What are you talking about? Why are you leaving? I need you." I couldn't believe the nerve of him, standing there, acting like he had no idea why I was quitting. "You really don't know?" I asked, my voice cold. "You think I'm oblivious? I found out what's been going on, and I'm done. I can't work here anymore." Mark's expression darkened, but then, to my disgust, he smirked. "Oh, so that's what this is about. Your wife." "John, come on, she was more than willing. Don't let this ruin your career. She'll come back to you once she's had her fun." I stared at him, my blood boiling. "Are you seriously suggesting I just accept this?" I asked, incredulous. "How long have you been screwing her?" Mark's smirk grew wider. "First time. At the camping trip. Remember that day you and the others went out skiing? She came on to me in your tent, said I was bigger than you, and practically begged me to take her." I felt the bile rise in my throat. So that's why he had sent me on that pointless errand during the trip. He wanted me out of the way so he could screw my wife in our tent. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "And that waitress gig at your party?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "That was just a cover, wasn't it? So you could get her into bed." He shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "Yeah. What of it?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, stopping the audio recording I had started earlier. "Thanks for confirming everything," I said icily. "I'm done here." Mark's smirk disappeared as he realized what I had just done. "Wait a minute," he stammered, "you can't use that recording." "We'll see," I replied, grabbing my things. As I walked out of Mark's office, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The power had shifted, and he knew it. I didn't care about his threats anymore. I was done being manipulated and lied to. With my resignation letter handed in, I headed straight to HR, submitted the paperwork, and walked out of that building for the last time. When I got home later that day, I was hoping to avoid Sarah. But of course, she was there, sitting on the couch, waiting. The moment I walked in, she stood up, clearly anxious. "Hey, you're home early," she said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the nervous edge in her voice. "How was work?" I didn't bother to answer her directly. Instead, I went straight into the kitchen, setting my briefcase down on the table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice hard. Sarah's face paled. "About what?" she asked, but her tone already told me she knew exactly what this was about. Without responding, I pulled out the photos from my briefcase, the ones Ethan had sent me of her and Mark at that party, and laid them on the table. She looked down at them, her hand covering her mouth as she gasped. "What the hell, John?" she stammered, tears instantly filling her eyes. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter," I replied coldly. "What matters is that you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now I have all the proof I need." She started crying, real hard tears this time. "I can explain," she sobbed. reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. Please, John, it was a mistake. A mistake. I repeated, anger boiling up inside me. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on your way home. This was no mistake. This was a choice, Sarah. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. She fell to her knees, grabbing at my pant leg, crying uncontrollably. Please, John, I don't want to lose you. I still love you. It didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid fling. I shook my head, stepping back, forcing her to let go of me. Love? I said bitterly. Do you even know what that means? If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You destroyed everything we had. She tried to stand, wiping her tears, but I could see the panic in her eyes now. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Are you going to leave me? I crossed my arms, keeping my voice calm despite the storm raging inside. I've already filed for divorce, Sarah. You'll be served later today. Her face went white as a sheet. Divorce? She whispered, as if the word itself was a death sentence. Yes, I said firmly. Divorce. And I'll be citing adultery. I've got more than enough evidence, and there's no way you're going to fight this. She collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the table, tears streaming down her face. Please, John, don't do this, she begged. I can change. We can fix this. I'll never do anything like this again, I swear. I don't want to lose you. It's too late for that, I said, my voice cold and final. You've already lost me. The moment you decided to spread your legs for Mark and his buddies, you made your choice. Now, you have to live with the consequences. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, and part of me felt the pang of sadness watching her break down like this. But then I reminded myself of those photos, the lies, the betrayal. She had done this to herself, and I wasn't going to be the one to comfort her anymore. There's one more thing, I said, cutting through her cries. I want your wedding ring back, and you're going to stop using my last name. You don't deserve either of them. She looked up at me, horrified, but she knew I was serious. Slowly, she slipped the ring off her finger and placed it on the table. John, please. She started again, but I was done listening. I'm leaving for a while, I said, grabbing my keys. When I get back, I expect you to be gone. Pack up your things, take whatever you want, but if you're still here when I return, I'll have the police escort you out. I could see the fear in her eyes now, the realization that this was really happening. I turned and walked out the door, ignoring her sobbing pleas behind me. It was over. There was no saving this, no going back. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and I was done. After leaving the house, I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head. I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, knowing everything Sarah had done. I pulled into a parking lot, just sitting in my car for a few moments, letting the reality of the situation sink in. My marriage was over. The life I had planned with Sarah, gone. I knew I had to move on, though, and I couldn't let myself fall into a pit of despair. I grabbed my phone and called Grace, telling her everything was ready for the papers to be served. She assured me it would happen that afternoon. The process was in motion, and there was no turning back now. Later, I returned home, half expecting to find Sarah still there, clinging to some hope that I'd changed my mind. But when I opened the door, the house was eerily quiet. Her car was gone, and there were a few empty spots where her belongings used to be. She had taken the warning seriously. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I wouldn't have to face another emotional confrontation that day. For the next few days, things were strangely peaceful. Sarah didn't try to contact me, and I focused on wrapping up the loose ends of our marriage. Grace filed the divorce papers, and Sarah didn't contest it. I think she knew she didn't stand a chance, especially with the evidence I had. But just when I thought I was in the clear, Mark started leaving me threatening voicemails. He wasn't handling the fallout well, and his ego couldn't take the fact that I wasn't backing down. John, you better drop this lawsuit or I'm coming over, and we'll settle this like men, he growled on one of the messages. I just smiled and forwarded it to Grace, who passed it on to the authorities. His arrogance knew no bounds, but I wasn't intimidated. I had the law on my side now. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. Peeking through the window, I saw Mark, his son Chris, and a couple of other guys from the office standing there, looking pissed. I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. I quickly grabbed my pistol from the gun safe, tucking it into my waistband, just in case things got ugly. After all, I wasn't about to let them intimidate me in my own home. I cracked the door open, just enough to confront them. "What do you want?" I asked coldly, already knowing the answer. "We want you to drop this lawsuit," Mark snarled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I pulled the door open a little wider, enough for them to see I wasn't backing down. "Not gonna happen, Mark," I said firmly. "Now, unless you want to end up in jail, I suggest you get off my property." He took a step closer, trying to push his way in. "You're not gonna shoot us, John. You don't have the balls." I pulled the pistol out just enough for him to see the barrel. "You want to find out?" I asked, my voice steady. Mark hesitated, realizing I wasn't bluffing. Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the air, and I could see the flashing red and blue lights approaching from down the street. "Looks like your time's up," I said, smirking. Before Mark and his crew could react, 2 police cars pulled up, and officers quickly got out, weapons drawn. "Hands up! Get on the ground," one of the officers shouted, his gun trained on Mark. Mark and the others froze, then slowly complied, dropping to their knees as the officers cuffed them. One of the cops approached me, glancing at the pistol in my hand. "Sir, I need you to put the weapon down." I did as he asked, setting the gun on the kitchen counter. "These men violated a restraining order," I explained. "I want to press charges." The officer nodded, pulling out the paperwork I had given them earlier. "We'll take it from here. Do you have a license for that firearm?" I showed him my concealed carry permit, and after a quick glance, he handed it back to me. "All right, sir, you're good to go. Just be careful." "I will," I said, relieved as they escorted Mark and his crew off my property. I knew this wouldn't be the last time I'd have to deal with him, but for now, I was safe. In the months that followed, life slowly began to return to normal. I started my new job at Empire, a company run by an old friend, and I threw myself into my work. It was a welcome distraction from everything that had happened, and I found that I actually enjoyed the work more than I ever had with Mark's firm. The divorce went through without a hitch. Sarah didn't fight it, probably because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. She moved out of town, and as far as I knew, she hadn't tried to contact anyone from our old life. I didn't care to know where she ended up, and honestly, I didn't care. What did surprise me, though, was the lawsuit against Mark. Not only did the judge find in my favor, but he ordered Mark to pay me $1 million in damages for what he had done. It was a huge win, and while the money didn't erase the pain of what happened, it helped me start fresh. The best part was watching Mark's business slowly crumble. Word got around about the lawsuit, and several of his clients jumped ship, not wanting to be associated with someone who had destroyed another man's marriage. In the end, Mark had lost more than just a lawsuit, he lost his reputation in his business. But the biggest shock came a few months after the divorce was finalized. I got a call from Sarah's mother, Margaret. "John, it's Sarah," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. She's HIV positive." I froze, the weight of her words hitting me like a freight train. "What?" "She's not doing well," Margaret continued. "She wanted me to call you. She's sorry, John. She's really sorry for everything." I didn't know how to respond. I had already moved on from Sarah emotionally, but hearing that she was sick, it still hit me hard. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But there's nothing I can do. We're divorced, Margaret. She made her choices." "I know," Margaret said softly. "I just thought you should know." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, trying to process everything. Sarah's choices had led her down a dark path, and now she was paying the price. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but the truth was, I couldn't. Not after everything she had done. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started going out with friends again, working out, and even began dating. Slowly but surely, I was moving on. And while the scars of what happened would always be there, I knew I was stronger for it. Life goes on, and so did I. Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.